Well, and now I'm very pleased to introduce our first keynote speaker, Kristina Palm, who is going to present Work and Digitalization. Kristina is PhD and Associated Professor at Karlstad University and Karolinska Institute in Sweden. Her research areas comprise several aspects of working life, from the working conditions of the individual worker to leadership and human resource management. In the last several years, she has specialized within the area of work and digitalization, boundaries between work and private life, and how the coronavirus pandemic affects working life. Welcome, Kristina.
Thank you very much. It's really nice to be here. Is my microphone on? It is. Perfect. It's really nice to be here, as we heard before, to meet people in real life, and also very nice to be here in Madrid, to have this possibility to see this city. So I will talk about work and digitalization, and especially work environment and digitalization. And it's really interesting with digital technology, because it can solve a lot of problems, but it can also create a lot of problems. And as we have seen in research, most often we don't think about the problems that actually can occur when we do digitalize. Before I will talk more about that, I think maybe I need to explore a little bit more what digitalization is. I'm sure we are in the PEROSH community, so you know what work environment is, but maybe you're not that familiar with the word digitalization. So we can describe digitalization with what it is, but also what it is not. And sometimes we use a similar word, anyway, in wording, but quite different meaning, and that is digitization. So digitization is the straightforward process of converting analog information to digital. So turning pages into bytes, for instance, by scanning a document or uploading a sound recording. It often also captures the process of moving a process from manual to digital, replacing hand-filled forms with online versions that go directly into a database, for example. And that is digitization. Digitalization is something much bigger. Is where digital technology create and harvest new values in organizations. So what digitalization doesn't do is change the business itself. And when doing research about digital technology, it's important to think digitalization, that we don't miss not only what new values we can create, but also what happens with the work environment. Because something will happen, even if we do think that we only transfer pages into bytes. Something will happen with the work environment. So what is the research, the state-of-the-art research on digitalization and work environment in Europe? Together with some colleagues, we finalized a rapid literature review last year on this topic. We searched out 3,740 articles through Scopus and Web of Science, and also the Nordic databases to get the language Swedish and Norwegian and so on. We looked for European studies published between 2010 and 2019, and then we included all sectors. So it could be public sector and the private sector. So we looked for every sector. And we used predefined inclusion and exclusion criteria with the PEO framework, and also some quality measures. And out of these almost 4,000 articles, we found, I would say, only 73 articles that focus digitalization and work environment. So what is the state of the art? If we just look upon themes within all these articles, we found actually two main themes. and that is digitalization and prevention, where we found 38 articles. And you can see here that they were about the physical work environment, the organizational and social work environment, and the combination of these two. And the main research was on physical work environment. And I will give you some examples later on. And the other theme is about digitalization effects on organization and social work environment. And here we found 41 articles. And the main area studied was flexible work in space and time, which is what we have been doing the last 1.5 years. We have been, anyway, flexible in place. And I will also talk more about that later on. But then also were some other areas like workload and demands and social relationship and leadership, knowledge and learning. And what's interesting is that we didn't find any articles that focused on digitalization effects on physical work environment. That was included in the prevention instead. So, for example, now during these 1.5 years, when people have been working from home, the ergonomics have probably not been that good, but we haven't seen any of these studies so far. So if we dig a little bit deeper into the research on digitalization and prevention, as I said before, most of the research is done on physical dimension of work environment. Interestingly, it's the male-dominant industries that are covered. It's like construction or mining industry. And the traditional female industries, like home care or retail, they are missing. And the research within this area most often start with a practical problem or a problem within work. And then it's transformed into a research question. And that is, of course, good. But we as researchers also have to look at what questions or what problems or what sectors are not studied. Could it be that in the female-dominated industries, there are problems, they are maybe raised, but they are not listened to? So research should also pay attention to what has not been articulated as problems. And there's also more research needed on physical and organizational and social work environment. For example, in healthcare, it's both a really social work, but it's also physical demanding. So we need to have research that cross over traditional boundaries. And if we look more into the physical work environment, the prevention and physical work environment, we have seen 6 areas of research. One area that is very popular right now is to create robots that can adapt to human movements. In industries, there is a wish for that people and robot can work together in so-called collaborative workspaces. But that is at the moment really dangerous because the robots are stronger, faster than us. So now researchers are trying to develop robots that can adjust to us humans. We also saw research on simulations and virtual reality experiments that can, when you work with those technologies, then you can take that knowledge to develop work environment into safe environments without risking human life or life and limb, for example. We also saw research on visualization technology, where workers can practice their work. So you can have your own work, and then you can put on a digital layer, and then you can, through that layer, learn where there are risks, and then you can learn how to prevent injuries. The fourth area is where research develop digital technology used as assistive aids. So as you see here on the picture, there's a firefighter. So for example, they have developed a jacket called a vital jacket that registers vital human signals like heartbeat, temperature, and then the firefighter will have signals from the jacket that tells them now it's too dangerous, continue, and then they can back off, for example. Researchers are also developing remote control robots. For example, if you work in construction sites and you don't want to be high up in the air where it's risky, then the worker can stand on the ground and work with a remote controlled robot. And this is also something that the research develop. And finally, digital technology can prevent ergonomic injuries. So one example is a glove with digital signals that can feel the strain and the muscle in the hand. And then by monitoring different kind of repetitive work, managers and can decide how the work should be done in real life. So what we see here is a lot of digital technology that really can prevent risks in work environment. And if we look a little bit more into the research on digitalization and organization and social work environment, this research focused on the effects of digitalization. And most often there has been a digital technology introduced to, for example, make the business more efficient or the customers more happy or something. And then they also look into what effects does it have on work environment. And we have seen that digital technology and work environment is a complex tapestry of risk and opportunities, and often on the same time. So the same digital technology can have both positive and negative effects, sometimes for the same individual, and sometimes is positive for one group of people or occupants or occupations, or good for someone else. It's interesting that the public sector, here I said, was not represented, but it's represented to a very little extent. And what we can say about what kind of research is needed. And here I took some examples where we only found one articles on each topic. So for example, robots as colleagues. Some of the research, or the research we have found, say that, well, it could be good because it may be lessen the workload. But on the other hand, what happens if we only have robots as colleagues? Because we are social creatures, which we have really learned during this 1.5 year of COVID time. And there's also need for more research on digital bullying within work setting. And there we also only found one article. We made a model, one can say, about the positive and negative consequences of digitalization within this area of organization and social work environment. So on the upper side, there are the positive aspects, and on the downside, we have the negative aspects. So this shows the total amount of effects that we saw in the research. So that's just one way to visualize that. But we think it's also could be a good way to use this model if a company or organization want to introduce digital technology. And then they probably think that, well, this maybe will make our process more efficient. Okay, that's good. But then they can also look to this model and think about what consequences might appear. If we have the positive ones, perfect. If we expect there will be negative effects, so then we should keep an eye on those and try to avoid them. So hopefully this model can be used for that. And if we look a little bit more into the flexible work in space and time, which of course is even more interesting now after this 1.5 year where most of us have been working from home. But what did the research say before COVID-19? So this the research on this topic, it's often called telework or new ways of working. And the research we have collected here is from when people are working from half a day up to 5 days at home, most often in the lower figures. And what to remember here, what is different from now, is that there is maybe 1 or 2 in a department that work from home, not the whole department or the whole organizations. And also here we see the positive and negative aspects. For example, we can see that working from home some part of the week create better work-life balance, increased autonomy in work. One can decide when to work and maybe how to work, and more efficient communication. And there are also people that feel that they are more productive when they are at home, away from colleagues, which we have to talk to in the corridor and so on. And the negative aspects is that some people feel that tasks can be more easily interrupted. And it could be because when we are at home, we have artifacts that reminds us of doing else than work. We have the refrigerator, maybe we have a nice garden, but when we are at work, all the artifacts are about work. It could be difficult to manage boundaries between work and personal life, and this can also catalyze conflicts between personal life and work. For example, when the kids come home and you try to be concentrated at work. So this could be a conflict, for example. Lack of informal interaction may lead to social and professional isolation. And the professional isolation is about that we might not be able to develop our skills, our knowledge, or develop the organization. So there's a risk of decline in development. And also there's a risk of not being able to make career, because what you do at home will not, your manager won't see it. And also lack of support, both from colleagues and managers. Some of this research have also a focus on gender issues, and I think that is really great that it is like that, and we need to continue to have a gender aspect on this research on digitalization and work environment. But here are some examples regarding flexible work in space and time. Telework can, for example, be more negative for women than for men, because they when they work a lot outside the office, because it might render the work invisible. So if your manager don't see and evaluate your work in the correct way, then it's possible that you won't be able to make career in the same ways as people that are at work or men working from home. It's also interesting that telework can maintain traditional gender roles, but it can also break them. Since we are in Spain, it's interesting to lift one study that showed that telework can facilitate the questioning of highly masculine labor models. For example, the tradition of siesta in Spain, which is, you can have siesta since a lot of the women are home taking care of children and the family. And that is the case in a lot of the European countries still. Even in Sweden, which we say is an equal country, there's still a higher demand for women to take care of children. And one can say that, well, then it's more easy to do that if we can be flexible in work, in space and time. But on the other hand, we also see that it can break them, that both men, male and females, take care of family. And then came the COVID pandemic, where we were told to stay home, to be safe, to keep your distance, and don't go out. So then the telework totally shifted for a lot of people, that we should stay at home and don't be at work. And there are some research already published, and there are a lot of research going on. I'm, for example, doing a photo elicitation interview study on people working from home during the COVID-19 to understand the difference from before and what both positive and negative aspects came out of that. And this research that have been published already, some of it have also this gender perspective, and they are from various countries in Europe. The first study here, it was a focus on women and working from home. It's a French study where they could see that women still have this larger responsibility for home and family. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, they were also worried more. So then there's a risk that they have less opportunities to recover. And of course, then there's a bigger risk for stress-related illness. But on the other hand, there are other research that show that women are more positive than men in the following. For example, they can follow their fitness programs. About 60% experience that they have better work-life balance than when being at work. And approximately 50% experience less risk of stress and burnout. So we know, for example, that you maybe save 1 hour or 2 hours traveling to work and home. So one can understand that there might be a little bit less stress. And about 50% also experience that it can be more efficient and concentrated when working from home. What about men and working from home? Well, I only found one study that focused on that. And in this study, they showed that men worry more about this, what we talked about before, the professional isolation, that they are worried that they will miss out on their career opportunities when not at work. And more general results that doesn't have a gender perspective, we could see that, or we can see here that fear of not being seen and miss out on career opportunities is something that have been seen in other research as well. And employees that are more dependent on other people and normally get a lot of feedback at work, they are more negative to working from home. And about 50% experience that they get more work done and can work less hours compared when physical at the workplace. And of course, if we just look at that number, it seems something that is positive. But what I believe and what we can see in our research is that the work becomes quite individual and people experience that they can do their own work in a more efficient way. But what about the work that we do together? What about the problems that we solve? You know, all the small chit-chat we do in the corridor, by the coffee machine, where we solve problems that we didn't even know they existed. So when we see the figures about being more productive, I think we should be a little bit cautious about that from a more organizational and goal perspective. A Swedish study showed that people can in general sleep 34 minutes more than before, and I would say that is good for our health. And they could also say that the everyday physical motion when working is the same at work as at home. And these are figures that our people have said themselves. And what about leadership during COVID-19? There's a Danish study they have collected data from different European countries. And it's interesting to see that the Danish managers experience work more demanding than the employees. And it is also something that we see in our Swedish material, that the managers experience this as tougher. They have a work environment responsibility, for example, and how could I know how the people I lead feel when they are at home. It's this digital filter. It's kind of in the way to really grasp how people are doing. But it's also interesting in this study that the Danish managers experience work more demanding than German managers. And what they could see in their data is that the German managers send more emails. The Danish managers have more digital meetings. So they think about, could the difference be in the way they are leaders? Having these digital meetings when you want to have consensus in questions and decisions in the Danish setting, and maybe in the German setting, it's more hierarchical and decisions are more pushed down. The study from France also could say that destructive leadership is destructive also at distance. So if we have leaders that are destructive, it doesn't help if we just send them home. We have to take care of that work environment problem as well. So finalizing this speech, I hope that I inspire you to do more research on digitalization and work environment. And there's a special need for more research on physical aspects in combination with organizational and social aspects on work environment. So we have to collaborate. Different researchers have to collaborate with their different knowledge and competence. And we have to do more research on prevention and digitalization in these traditional female work settings like healthcare, as I said before, or retail. And we also have to study the effects of digitalization on the public sector. And I'm doing a research study also on digitalization in the public sector. And when we looked for literature here, most of the research is about how can the public sector be more efficient, how can our clients be more happy with what we deliver. But they totally miss out on the work environment aspect. So this is really important area for research. I have my reference to this speech is in the end of this PowerPoint presentation, which I hope you can take part of later on. So thank you.
Thank you, Kristina. That was very helpful and fascinating. Now we are going to start with the question time. So if you have any question to ask to the keynote speaker, please raise your hand. Does anybody have any question?
Thank you, Kristina. I'm Mercedes Tejedor from the National Institute of Spain. I would like to know if you think that enterprises have learned something about leadership during this pandemic crisis regarding digital telework. Do you think they have learned something for the future or not? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that organizations have learned that we can do much more work digitally or in the virtual environment from home or anywhere. And I also think that we can learn a lot more on leadership. If we look into the literature on, for example, e-leadership, which was popular like 20 years ago, then they say that, well, e-leadership, electronic leadership or leadership at distance and leadership at the office or at the site, work site, is very similar. But when we look into our data, we have to understand that are really maybe things that we can really touch upon. It's not that obvious what it is, but it is something happens when we are in the room, the leaders and the employees. So I don't think we can say that it is the same. We want to achieve the same things, but we probably have to have other kind of knowledge and skills to be good leaders in the virtual environment.
Thank you. Anita, it's my name, from Bauer in Germany. Thank you, Kristina, for the presentation. It was very interesting, and I really liked the point you made that we should work more closely into physical exposure in combination with organizational exploitation, all this, I really agree to that when I look into the literature. But I'm interested in a different point. You mentioned telework during the COVID, and when we look into studies in Germany about telework during the crisis, we see that attitudes and experiences changed through the course of the crisis. So, well, in the beginning, it was more like a release to work from home. They reported better work-life balance and everything. But only like 6 months later, it completely changed, and people experienced more, it was more a burden. They wanted to go back to the office, and they felt like more work, family conflicts and all that. What did you learn from the studies, maybe more, from more an international point of view?
Yeah, I think that is a really good question, that we have to be aware of what time we study these issues. And I also think it's a country difference. We can see some of it in Sweden as well, changing. But from the study that I'm doing, in Sweden we have to remember that we were allowed to be at work, even if the authorities said those who can should stay at home. And for example, those public organizations that I am studying, they also said you should work from home if you can. But if people were really, they couldn't do it, their health was bad because of it, or if they had a family and they lived in a small apartment, they were allowed to go back to work. So I think that the Swedish results will differ from the countries where you weren't allowed at all to be outside. So in that regard, I think that people have experience working from home differently during different times. But and one aspect is because it's had been a long time, and that is of course tiresome to work from home. But it could also be like we have learned a lot more how to do it and do it in good ways. So, and the mindset had also been different. From the beginning it was we have to change now just to make business work. And then were people quite happy that they managed to do that. But maybe a lot of things weren't taken care of because we thought that, well, in the summer we can go back again. So I think also the kind of work we have done during the pandemic has changed. So there are a lot of different aspects about this, but it's important to study the time point during the pandemic.
How do you think it will change in the future?
In Sweden, there's a lot talk about the new normal, and that is a hybrid solution where people are allowed to work from home like 2 days a week and be at work 3 days a week. But that could also be problematic because people want to meet when they are at the office. But if I go to the office and no one else will be there, but because they also have a choice, then there's a risk that we won't meet at the office. I think we have to find ways where we can meet. But there's a lot of difficult issues around that, I think. And one thing what managers, anyway in Sweden, I don't know how it is in other countries, and I also think that this is about that in Sweden we have been allowed to be at work, is that managers in Sweden ask the single employee, what do you want? And they forget about that we are here for a purpose. We have a goal for this organization, this business. We have a strategy. And how can we achieve that on the same time as we have a good working environment, at the same time as we can hire people? So it's a lot of questions. I think it's really more difficult now to go back or into the new normal than going into the COVID-19 transition.
My name is Marianne Schaapman. I work at the European Trade Union Institute in Brussels. Thank you, Kristina, for this really, really interesting presentation and also very important research overview. I think it's clear that you didn't find so many articles to use, so there's a need for a lot more research, that's clear. My question refers to the prevention element. that you got into, and it might seem a detail, but I don't think it is, and I would like to ask your reflection on it. Prevention. You mentioned measurement methods on the body, both for to measure heartbeat and all those kind of things, or to measure ergonomic movements. And well, this is fine. It gives us information. But I also think that this is it's individualizing prevention. It's so my question actually is, to what extent is this really prevention? Because if I know that I do the wrong movements, we need something more to really to change the situation, to get real prevention. Same with heartbeat of a fireman. I mean, if he has a very high heartbeat, can he really refrain from his work? So, yeah.
That's a good point. We haven't thought about that, but I think that some of the research here think more about the organizational aspects of how should we organize work when we have this new knowledge from the measurements. But there are probably, as you say, individual measurements that are maybe not taken care of. I don't know about I don't remember how it is with this vital jacket, for example, if it could be tuned into the individual or not. But it's an interesting question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Boney from the Danish NFA. Thank you very much for your presentation. A quick question in terms of the digitization as sort of, did you look into trying to sort of structure digitization into different kinds of digitization, such as those that replace work tasks, human work tasks, those that enable human work tasks, and those that enhance human work tasks, or something like that? Because I would assume that the positive and negative consequences could possibly be structured based on those those categorizations.
Yeah, that's a
Thank you.
No, we didn't do that. That's one way to analyze the results. In another way, I would say that when the report that we have written is kind of is a rapid review, so the time to make this analysis weren't there really, but they're quite dispersed in different areas, so it's also difficult to say something. But I think that is that's a good way to do the analysis again. I haven't thought about it. Thank you.
Wheeler Ron from IMS. I have a question about time scales. You discuss mainly, the pandemic was not so long after all, we discussed short-term time scales effect, like the conciliation between private working life, the relationship with your boss, the support of collective support. But don't you think that we may expect, if the telework is generalized, longer-term effect, like the fact that employees will lose their feeling to belong to a company, the fact that the employer may prefer to outsource a job because there is no difference between an outside company and someone at home. So don't you expect also longer-term effect in the 10-year scale, time scales?
Yeah, I think that's really relevant, that we haven't seen all the effects yet. And I think, for example, the ergonomics, working from home, is one aspect, and also what you raised here, that the belonging to an organization. And in the material that the interviews that we have done in my research project, they have been at work sometimes, And we have one manager that said, well, I have to be at work at least, I think, 2 times in a month, because otherwise I don't feel the connection with my organization. My energy and my motivation will fall down. So I think there's a time perspective here, absolutely.
Chris de Meester from the Federation of Enterprises in Belgium and also representing Business Europe. I also have a question. So we have approximately 30 years of experience with telework. There is massive amounts of information within HR departments of companies, but also within national economic institutes on telework. And my question is, should we not be very careful with drawing lessons from telework during the crisis? Because by definition, this was not a normal situation, which sometimes imposed telework. So should we not be very careful and rather look at the experience from before the crisis than drawing lessons? Because it seems to me that everybody is now drawing lessons from the crisis situation, which is not the normal situation.
I think we have to draw lessons from both here. And it depends, if we want to use it later on in working life, it depends on what direction we take. So I would say, for example, in Sweden, if we take this hybrid direction where people can work from home and at the office, then it will be like 2 days or so. Then there's definitely more people that will work from home than before when we had telework. So then we have to learn more about how is it when a lot of people are working from home, when we don't meet regularly. So I think we have to try to make a combination of the knowledge from telework before the COVID-19 and afterwards, if depending on what kind of direction we choose. And we have also learned a lot with the digital technologies, how we meet, for example. So before, we have changed the way we understand work, I would say. Work is not at the office. We can do work in other places. And before, where there was this a lot of professional isolation, you were excluded from work, from meetings if you weren't at the office. But now we have learned with Teams or Zoom or whatever that you actually can be part of meetings. So there has been a change.
Well, unfortunately, we are running out of time. So thank you for your participation. Thank you, Kristina, for answering the questions. And now...